So this is innovation through biomimicry. We are continuing with the part 2. So before I continue with this, let me just clarify on the things which I discussed. A point which was raised in the last video, which was under evolve to survive. I discussed about integrate the unexpected, where I mentioned that mistakes are important, and in fact mistakes are important because mutation is part of a mistake, which is a essential part of evolution. But issue was raised that mistakes can kill organisms, it can kill species. Yes, of course, the mistakes can kill, but mistakes are important. It's an important mistakes are important way by which nature is trying to explore. So on a broader context, mistakes helps the species to survive in the longer context. An individual might perish. Also, in the context of education, I mentioned that mistakes are penalized. Of course, if you get something factually wrong, then that is wrong. There is no doubt in that. But our examination system need not be checking the binary of yes or no. It need to be more in terms of trying to understand better, maybe tolerate ambiguity and so on. Facts are important, of course facts are important. We are living in a world where facts have been sidelined, and we are talking about alternative facts and all that nonsense. Facts are important. Opinion which is based on facts, which works in the premise of the argument, are important. So having dealt with that, let's move to the slide. Let's move to this video here. So we are continuing with life principles, and yeah. So we continue with life principle, and those who have joined late, let me just reiterate what life principle is all about. Life principle is a common pattern or factors found among different species that make them successful. You see, the species which are surviving today, which are existing today, are success stories of millions of years of rigorous testing and survival strategies. So the attempt here is to understand what makes life successful despite overwhelming odds. And life principle therefore gives us the common patterns and strategies. And life actually integrates these patterns in optimal configuration to further its chance to survive as a species. And also in the process it creates condition conducive for living. So it's an attempt to identify and emulate the strategies that species share. So therefore life principle actually sets a standard for emulation and sustainable ideas. So in the quest of for a sustainable solution for human challenges, life principle allow us to kind of allow the innovators to consult and learn from nature's experience. So life principle can be actually seen as leverage points, as Donella Meadow, the systems thinker, suggested. So in an Earth complex system like Earth, we can conceive life principle as a leverage points. And of course the highest leverage point is of course changing the mindset, attitudinal modification or re-evaluation or ethos. So it helps us to refine our thinking and reconnect with nature. So we'll continue discussing with the structural coloration from the last video under life principles, that is use life-friendly chemistry. How does nature produce colors? How does these birds and insects and fruits produce resplendent, iridescent and astounding colors? These colors are not only vibrant but also long-lasting. So how does nature achieve these different types of colors? So nature achieves this through structures, but also through pigments. But we'll discuss. We are here to discuss the structures. So structural coloration is achieved through nano layers, which absorb and reflect light. And these complex nanostructures are multi-layered structures. So they are able to produce iridescence, which gives an impression of color appearing to change depending on the angle of view. Unlike pigments, so pigments is where the molecules tend to absorb all the wavelengths of light except the one which it has to display. For instance, the leaves are green because it has pigments which absorbs all the color wavelengths except green, so the leaves appear green. So structural coloration is different, entirely different. So it is the way the nano layers of photosensitive structures are arranged. So that way it gives this feeling of unlike human beings, we produce colors through chemical dyes, and toxic elements are used, and it pollutes water, the sources, and also create cancer. And not only that, it fades with time. These colors which is produced by nature is not only brilliant but also does not fade. Then there is another way of arranging structures, which is variable structures, and these are done by cephalopods like octopus or cuttlefish, which produce a stunning optical effect, which helps in camouflaging. So these nanophotonic color perceptive structures are diverse, and through millions of years of evolution, it is serving different purpose for different species. So not only that, this not only produce optical function but also thermal function. So the material can is arranged in such a way they can manipulate light as well as heat. So we have bright colors which can be more reflective and thus help in cooling in hot environment, or we can have less reflect layers where of darker shades which help in sequestering heat. So there are different and these have a lot of application. For instance, the one which you see on the picture here is the clothes. These clothes are having no dyes. It's using structural coloration. So it has a lot of possibilities and potential in cosmetic or textiles or paints or optical coating, security labels or sensors or optical devices, even robotics, biomedical implants, or in sports as well, fashion or military or conservation. So huge area. This structural coloration is thing which is quite hot these days. So this is Morphus butterfly wing, and Morphus butterfly is the brightest butterfly in the world, and they generally found in Central America and South America, and they produce light through structural coloring, of course, iridescent blue color. Incidentally, blue is the most rarest color which can be found on in nature. We'll discuss that in the next slide. And they of course produce through structural coloring, that is physics of light at the nanoscale, and it has a lot of potential in creating digital screen display units. And Qualcomm company actually tried it about a decade back. They created these Mirasol e-readers, but somehow it did not it did not, it was a failure, in fact, not because the viability of technology, but I think the investors were in a hurry or something of that sort. Now recently I was reading about cuttlefish TV screen, which utilizes only 1% of the power which is used by the conventional TV screens, and this works in the altering space between membranes, and it has a lot of potential in outdoor display where it utilizes sun rays. Now these are emerging technologies, and structural coloring has a lot of potential, and a lot of technologies are coming up utilizing structural coloring. So I'm going to spend some time to do a parallel between blue color and how humanity progressed. The progress here is within quotes, by starting with replacing nature, then dominating nature, and now we're moving towards biomimicry as sustainable solutions. Therefore, nature as mentor. You see, the color blue was very rare. You rarely find a blue color in nature. So it was Egyptians about 4000 BC that they found lapis stones, which is found in the certain mountain ranges in Afghanistan. That is the only place you find lapis stones, which could be used to make blue color. So for centuries, blue was such a rare color that lapis stones were equivalent to gold, and only rich people could afford blue color. Therefore, it created social distinction. The blue was color of prestige, and richer people used to wear blue attire and blue dyed attire and clothes. So it was depiction of royalty. And during this period, you will see the paintings. You don't see paintings having blue color, very rare. And if ever it was used to depict important people. For instance, Mother Mary was always depicted draped in blue color, so to show significance and importance. Much later, the plant-based dye started appearing in indigo from India and South America. So, but it did not have the quality of lapis stones, which created what we call ultramarine color. So ultramarine is a Latin term for beyond the ocean, because this color used to come beyond the ocean. So it was only in early 18th century, that the chemical dyes were created, which replaced blue, the natural dyes, and suddenly you will see a lot of blue color in painting, and it coincided with Renaissance period, and we had a lot of painters using blue color. In fact, Picasso had a blue period where he used hues of blue. Now imagine this was a few thousand years back. Many of the painters did not have blue color. Many of them were in debt because they used blue color, and many paintings were not completed because of lack of blue color. So there is a shift. Now we are moving towards sustainable innovations to biomimicry. Therefore, we are looking at nature as a mentor. So how does this bird produce blue color? And that is what we discussed in the last section, that is structural coloring. So rather than natural dyes or chemical dyes, we are moving towards much sustainable solution by understanding how the nature functions and produces blue color. Just another example of nature-friendly chemistry, of how nature utilizes structures to create functions. Now, as I said in the last video, that in nature weaker forces are in demand, and we discussed about hydrogen bond while discussing how it creates properties of water. So here we are going to discuss something called van der Waals forces. These van der Waals forces are weak intermolecular forces that increases when molecules come together, but it generally remains quite weak. So how nature utilizes van der Waals forces is what we're going to discuss here, and the question is, how does a gecko or a lizard walk on the wall or climb on the wall, or sometimes hanging upside down on the roof while walking, in fact walking on the roof? So how does it do it? And we find that they don't have any what do you call adhesive fluid, or they don't have suction cups, or nor do they use electrostatic forces. So they use intermolecular interactions. So it's a nano level directional addition which happens, and what they do is that they actually increase the van der Waals forces. Although it is a weaker force, gecko is able to utilize these weaker forces by making it stronger. And how does it do it? It has about 14,000 hair-like setae per square millimeter on its legs. So each setae is further tipped between 100 to 1000 spatulas. So it is further dividing. Now these structures bond with surface at the molecular level using van der Waals forces. So it divides to such an extent that the molecular forces, which was once a weaker force, become stronger and create a strong adhesive effect. But since it is a weak force, it can easily be broken by changing direction and repeating and reusing. It's a remarkable way of manipulating weaker forces to create properties. Now imagine what possibilities these have, and we utilize glue, which is toxic formaldehyde, and which causes cancer. And in fact, one of the most common cause of indoor pollution is this toxic fumes which is coming out of these furnitures, which is glued through chemical glues. So that's a very good example of how nature utilizes structures to create function. So we'll discuss breakdown products into benign constituents, which comes under life principle, life-friendly chemistry. So in nature, toxic substances are produced. It is not that toxic substances are not produced. Venom is a good example of toxic substance. But there are a few things. One is that it does not harm the host. For instance, the venom does not harm the snake. So it follows the principle of making condition conducive to life. Unlike what human being does, is that we produce toxic element which end up destroying the environment as well as creating cancer and polluting water and so on. And once the venom is injected into the prey, which not only probably kills or immobilize the prey, it also helps in digestion. So it starts digesting the inside of the prey. So it's serving multi-purpose needs. So the venom is produced locally in limited quantity, and that too on demand. So many times the cobra, for instance, will not bite human beings. It will have a blank shot. So it will avoid as much as possible to inject venom, because venom is very costly to produce. So it not only produces in limited quantity, but it's used sparingly unless and until it's seriously threatened or it is the prey. Secondly, once the use is over, the venom is broken down into harmless constituents. Now, as you probably know, venom is a modified saliva, and which is a protein. Hence, it is broken down into reusable amino acids. So, understand this, that in nature, it is not broken down into, the protein is not broken down into atoms of carbon, hydrogen, or nitrogen, but stable building blocks like amino acid, which is readily available to make new protein. So we have to learn a lot of things about the green chemistry in nature, and how things are made, used, or remade. So eliminating waste and optimizing reuse. So as we move towards the sharing economy, these things have to be understood. Also, as we move towards access rather than ownership, we move towards green chemistry. So we'll discuss about do chemistry in water, which is again part of life-friendly chemistry. And as discussed in the first video, that is Innovation Through Biomimicry Part 1, we discussed about the properties of water which makes it life nurturing. And all chemistry of life is done in water. Water is the solvent used in life's chemistry. Whereas we use toxic chemicals, and which causes environment degradation and cancer, and increasing case of asthma can be connected to all this, and even Parkinson's and other diseases. So because we want molecules to do what we want to do, using high temperature, high pressure, and toxic reagents. While in nature, molecules have evolved to do things in room temperature, ambient pressure, and water as solvent. So we need to learn how molecules interact and work accordingly to find sustainable solutions. See, nature faces the same functional challenges as we do, whether it is lubricating or holding on to slippery surfaces, impact resistance, or flavoring, coloring, or even fragrance. But all these are done in water. It's a biodegradable, non-toxic manner. For instance, look at this picture here. We have this teeth. The toughest part or hardest part of human body is enamel. Enamel is the covering of the teeth and outer layer of the teeth. And this is produced in human body through making water as a solvent. And we are trying to emulate it. In fact, many of the industries have gone in for water-based treatment plants. So, living world has spent 3.8 billion years to figure out how to solve challenges through chemistry-enabled adaptations. So, this can be a rich, of course, it is a rich source of ideas for innovation. So, we move to the next life principle, that is adapt to changing conditions. So, when we talk about adapting changing condition, the one species which comes to mind is octopus. It's a camouflage specialist. It's a highly intelligent species, and it constantly adapts to the surrounding and conditions. It has to, because it's a soft meat body organism. It does not have any bone, so it has to protect itself from the predators. So what it does is it has a specialized pigment cell which take localized decisions by sensing the surrounding. So the same example we have what we call homeostasis, where localized decisions taken. For instance, our body can tolerate temperature between 35 degrees to 38 degrees. Anything more or less will close down the system. Or even our pH of blood is 7.3.5 to 7.4.5. So we have very narrow range of life. So our body need to constantly be aware of the surrounding and adapt to the changing condition. So that is what we call self-regulating process to maintain internal stability, what is called homeostasis. So this is applied in buildings these days, where we have buildings which can take their own decisions in terms of responding to the surrounding. So if in terms of maintaining temperature and carbon dioxide level inside the buildings. There's a lot of learning for the organizations also. So hierarchical organization with command and control leaders are being replaced by nimble and decentralized networks that act more like a nervous system than factory. So we have a lot of learning for organizations also. I have a video on biomimetic managers where I discuss about what managers can learn from nature. Maybe you could have a look into it. So incorporate diversity to multiply option is the first one, and if you have diversity of available options, if you have several available options, then you can manage challenges more efficiently. So diversity in strategy or behavior, you can have behavioral or physical or psychological diversity, helps organism to take advantage to new opportunities. For instance, take the example of leopard here. Leopard is has been able to survive, and compared to, let's say, lion or lion or cheetah, because leopard has a diversity of habitat. It can be found almost everywhere across the world. So it is able to survive. For instance, the largest concentration of leopard is found in near Mumbai, in one of the largest cities. So it is an opportunistic species because it's able to diversify its habitat. So organization can also learn a lot of things from this, and diversifying is a way to survive and also to build flexibility. Not only that, in recruitment, if you have people from diverse backgrounds and diverse field of interest or diverse culture or habits or traits and all, it helps to build up a robust decision making system. So diversity is very important. So life adapt to changing conditions by maintaining integrity through self-renewal. Organisms are constantly self-renewing through self-healing. So self-renewal allows life to maintain integrity but also adapt to changing conditions. So it's all response to the pressures of the environment. So let's take the example of, let's say, tree. So tree tends to keep on continuously renewing itself on the lines of stress, along the lines of stress, and like our bone. But the difference here is trees keeps on adding material, but bones not only add materials but takes it away when it is not needed. So if you are, let's say, a badminton player, a right-handed badminton player, so your right hand will be, the bones of the right hand will be more stronger, denser, more material will be added. But once you stop playing or stop practicing, it tends to take it away. So our bones are lightweight and strong, so the body cannot afford to put more energy into where it is not needed, so it takes it away. And as you probably know, that bones are protecting all the important organs of the body, so it has to be at the fittest. So that is why we have this picture here where bone remodeling cycle, it is called, where the bone keeps on healing itself. There is a process by which it keeps on healing itself, and to strengthen and function, reshape for the functional demands. So it's a process by which the bone keeps on self-renewal to maintain integrity. So the right side we are having self-healing concrete is an example which is an emulation of this. So we have concrete which self-renewal itself, self-heals itself. So in the concrete we put some bacteria, and the bacteria, when the crack happens, the bacteria tends to grow and emit calcium carbonate. So lightweighting is a very important part of biomimicry, how we can reduce the material used in manufacturing. So in the first video I discussed innovation through biomimicry part 1. I discussed about slime mold, and the algorithms of slime mold has been utilized to reduce material. So we also give an example of 3D printed vehicle, car, where material which is not used, where the places a lot of less stress was there, material less used. So if you reduce the amount of material, for instance, take the example of bone also, where there is no stress, the material is taken away. So we can have the algorithm where which wherever the vehicle is facing stress, that is where you put more material. Where the stress is less, you take away the material. So it has a direct repercussions in the terms of consumption of fossil fuel. So 10% reduction in car weight has been found to cut fuel consumption by 7%. So lightweighting is a very important area. I have a video on biomimicry and lightweighting. You can also visit that. So this is a chart which is trying to point out the emission related to energy and industrial processes. The emission here is carbon dioxide, carbon emissions. So transport as 23%, industry 36%, and buildings at 33%. So if you're looking for innovative, sustainable solutions, these are the areas which need focus. Because if you reduce, because the most important thing now is climate change and carbon emission. So these are the areas which is having the maximum emission of carbon, and if you can have sustainable innovation, biomimetic innovations, these are the areas which need to be focused. So if you want to be more specific, the majority of carbon dioxide emitted is by the production of these 5 materials. So steel, aluminum, cement, plastic and paper. So if you really want to reduce the carbon emission, these are the areas of focus, and these are the areas which needs sustainable innovations, and biomimicry can be a good source for innovation. So adapt to changing condition is also through embodying resilience through variation, redundancy and decentralization. So what exactly this means is that variation means carrying out the same function in different ways, while redundancy means many units performing the same function, so that if one unit is affected, others can take over. Whereas decentralization of course means functions are spread out, so malfunction or disturbances somewhere does not really critically impact the other functions. So the good example here is prairies. Now prairies are vast land which is very resilient, and different functions like nitrogen fixation, preventing soil erosion or water conservation, all that is done in different ways in different seasons by variety of plant species, and this makes prairie ecosystem a very resilient ecosystem, and it is able to face natural disasters like flood or forest fire or drought without losing its critical functionality. A very good example from human context is aircrafts, and aircrafts have engines and landing gear and navigation which are diverse in their operating mechanism. Take the example of landing gear. So in an aircraft, landing gear there will be an electric option, there will be a mechanical option, there is a hydraulic option, there is a pneumatic option. So if one fails, the other takes over, because if it does not work, there will be a crash. So it has to be resilient. And not only that, the manufacturing of each part is done by different companies, so that if there is a manufacturing defect which enters through one company, it does not spread. So there are different ways by which resilience is created. So the last one of life principle is be resource efficient. So to survive, organisms skillfully take advantage of local resources and opportunities. Now resource here is tangible resources, which is material, or intangible like information and energy. So to survive, life has evolved to utilize resources efficiently and perform function with minimum waste. So expending too much of energy or being inefficient in managing these resources means death. So it has to be species have to be very careful in terms of how to handle resources. So life prefers low energy processes, minimizing energy consumption. So organisms function at temperature and pressure that is conducive to life, thus reducing the energy demands. As discussed in the last video, chemical reaction is mostly lock and key arrangement of molecules, and it is elegantly done to achieve the results. So nature achieved results that are stronger and sustainable than human made material, which is using high temperature and high pressure and toxic chemicals, what we call heat, beat and treat. Take for instance Abalone shells, which you see here in this picture here. These are 200 times more stronger than the toughest human made ceramics. So, and these are produced by nature by pulling out minerals from seawater at seawater temperature and pressure, so which is a low energy process. So we are also trying and emulating it. This solar energy is an efficient and sustainable way to align to nature's way of doing things. So we have a lot to learn from nature and a lot of possibilities of innovation through biomimicry. So one way of utilizing resources efficiently is to manipulate natural forces. what we call Earth's operating systems or parameters, which we discussed in the first video, and to take advantages of this forces to save energy. So here is example of prairie dogs, and prairie dogs are found in Northern America. These are not dogs; they have alarm calls which sounds like dogs, but otherwise they are rodents and you can say ground squirrel species. So they are able to manipulate the wind energy for ventilating burrows by altering air pressure. Now this have been many of the buildings also, which is using the air pressure difference to create ventilation. So another interesting mechanism, energy saving mechanism from nature, is the coloring of zebra. Now zebras are living in hot terrain, and this stripes, black and white stripes, not only tends to confuse the colorblind lion and also dissuades flies to settle down. It has another interesting aspect to it, and that is the dark color tends to absorb more heat and white tend to absorb less. So it creates temperature difference, which tends to create pressure difference, and that leads to air circulation. So it's a kind of a natural air conditioning for zebra. Similar is the case of saguaro cactus here, which has ridges, and as you can see, the ridges tend to provide create a self-shading mechanism, and it reduces the area exposed to sun, and thus the same way it also creates pressure difference, and there is an airflow to cool it. So there are different interesting mechanisms which we come across, which energy saving mechanism which come across in the nature, which is worth emulating. So life achieves resource efficiency by using multifunctional designs for multiple needs. Organisms tend to invest on form, and every form has function, and every form has multifunction for multiple needs. So these multiple needs are met with one elegant solution. Take this example of a bird here. It's a water bird, it's a duck. So what's the bird doing here is it's actually what we call preening. So in the process it's cleaning itself, it's arranging and rearranging its feather after a swim or a flight. It is using preen oils, and which is used for waterproofing the feather, and the oil is also breaking down into vitamin D on the exposure of sunlight, and while preening it also coats the oil on its beak, which acts as a moisturizer and therefore prevents cracks. So one act of preening, the bird is doing multifunctioning. So it is cleaning, it is waterproofing, it is producing vitamin D, it is moisturizing. So that is how nature functions. So that is how resource efficiency is achieved. Human beings have emulated, human beings have understood the need for multiple functions, and if you are born before 1980 you will know this, and these are different gadgets which used to exist, and now everything is collapsed into smartphone. So a very good example of multifunctional designs. So another way of achieving resource efficiency is by recycling waste. In nature there is nothing like garbage. So the garbage is actually the garbage of one species is the raw material for another species and system. So nature works by keeping material in closed loop, and there is cooperation and interaction. So in nature recycling is not direct. For instance, when the nitrogen, when the plant actually dries up, the nitrogen is taken out because nitrogen is precious. Of course, that is before Haber's process, and carbon, which is very abundant, is given out. So rare elements are taken, and the one which is in abundant is given out. So unlike human beings, we are going in for take, make, and waste linear process under the assumption there's an infinite resource for infinite growth, with no limits for, with no regard for any concern for law of nature or what we discussed in the first video. So all the natural disasters which we see around is a symptom. It's a systemic breakdown. So now, of course, we are becoming more responsible. We are moving from ownership economy to sharing and accessing economy. So you have these taxis and Uber and sharing and all that. So not only that, the companies are going in for recycling or repurposing, or also designing for disassembling. So components can be reused or recycled or upcycled. But we have long way to go, in fact. Nature fit forms to function to achieve resource efficiency. So life uses shape rather than material or energy to meet function, because material is expensive. while shape is free. So instead of adding more material, the organism takes advantage of shape in order to perform desired function. So if you come across any form in nature, there is almost always a function, in fact multifunction. And take this example of birds' beaks here. And I have spent a lot of time in nature. I have done hundreds and hundreds of nature walks, and it's amazing to see different shapes of beaks depending on the habitat or depending on the prey. So for instance, you have spoonbill, you have bee eaters, and you have uh, so many different types of beaks are there. So these are all examples of fitting form to function, and we have emulated this in furnitures. So fitting form to multifunction is an example here. So it's a case of emulating nature for resource efficiency. So we are looking at biomimetic solutions at two levels, and one is challenge to biology, that is C2B, and another is biology to design, that is B2D. The first one is that you have a challenge. For instance, there is a lot of pollution, there is climate change, there is shortage of food, or there is so much of problems. So you are looking at biology to find a solution. So it becomes a challenge to biology. The second one is biology to design. Is you come across something in nature which you would like to design, which you find very interesting, and you would like to create a product out of it or create a design out of it. So that is B2D. So both approaches we'll spend some time to discuss. In fact, the first one is slightly comprehensive, so we'll discuss both. So one of the major problems of the recent time is plastic, and we need to have a solution to plastic. So a lot of research is happening to find a solution to plastic. So we have to look at nature also to find out what solutions can be found to solve this problem. So that is what we call challenge to biology. So there are steps involved when you're going for challenge to biology. That is, we have to go through a process, and that's called biomimicry design spiral. We'll discuss this in detail as we proceed. So let's take the example of challenge to biology. So a lot of birds were dying. In fact, hundreds and thousands of birds dying because of high-rise buildings, and high-rise building uses a lot of glass, and the birds were not able to distinguish between glass and the sky. So there are a lot of deaths, fatalities. So this is the challenge we have. So how do we find solution? Nature is a question now. So to prevent the birds banging into the glass, they did a lot of things like creating a design so that the birds understand that there's a glass here. But you know, these loses that intention of glass, because we have glass for a reason, and also it is not aesthetic. They did a lot of study, and they found that the birds were avoiding this spider web, the huge spider webs the birds tend to avoid. And they did research on this, and they found that the spiders were using UV rays strands, and which was seen by birds. So human beings are not able to perceive UV rays, and the UV rays strands were seen by the birds, and they avoided it. So having understood that, they created these glasses which had UV strands embedded in it. So it can be seen by the birds, therefore they avoid the glass. And for human beings, it's a plain glass. So this is a very good example of challenge to biology. So we had this challenge, the birds were dying, and then we went to the nature to find out the solution, and we came up with a beautiful solution. So very good example of challenge to biology. So now let's take the example of biology to design. So biology to design means that you find something in nature and you find it interesting and try to emulate it. So there was this person called Percy Shaw, and he was coming back from late night, and in his vehicle in a foggy night. There was no street lights, and he suddenly come across a cat, and the cat's eyes was shining, and he found it very interesting, and he went home and he created something called cat's eye reflector, or what we call retro reflector safety device, which is so ubiquitous now. You will find this in every road, and the one on the top here is self-cleaning retro reflector. So what happened here is that the cat's eye, behind the retina, there is a reflective surface which is called tapetum lucidum, and which creates an effect called eye shine. It helps to see it for the cat to see it in darkness. So he created this device which reflects back radiation straight to the source with minimum of scattering, and unlike flat, it works in wide angle of incidence. So this is an example of biology to design. So now let's spend some time to discuss the first part, that is a challenge to biology. So as I said, we need to discuss it further. So how do we go about it? That is, you have a technological challenge or a design challenge, and then you find a biological model, and then you explore the nature for solution. This is a simplistic way of looking at it. We'll spend some time to elaborate it. So we'll come back to challenge to biology. As I said, there is a process involved, and we're going to spend some time on it. So first we have to define the challenge, and with that we define the function with the context, and then we have to biologize it, which means we have to use terms which is understood by nature, because we are using terms which is technological, which is human terms. So for biology to understand, we have to kind of use equivalent terms which could be understood through biology, and then we go to nature and try to find out biological models which have solved these problems. And once we have found the models, we come back and we abstract. Here we are debiologizing it. We are removing the biological terms, and we are taking the physics behind it, or the design principles behind it, and then we emulate it and try to create a prototype and evaluate it. This is essentially what challenge to biology design spiral is, and this has been taken from biomimicry to 3.8. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it here. We don't have too much of time, so next few slides you just go through it. My PPT is quite comprehensive, and then I'll meet you after a few slides. So I'm sure it was quite interesting. The challenge to biology has been comprehensively dealt. So it's a very systematic process, and I hope it helps you to do sustainable innovation through biomimicry. And I'm going to leave this slide here of a fish. Now, many of the reports have pointed that there is going to be water shortage, but we are surrounded by ocean. But ocean water is saline water. But then inside the ocean there are fishes, and inside the fish there is fresh water, which means the fishes are able to convert the saline water into fresh water. So which means there is a technology which is available to solve our challenges. So what I'm trying to point out here is each and every species is been part of evolution for millions of years, and it carries all the R&D which is for us to tap and solve our problems. So thank you. I am available for workshops, seminars and talks. You can always contact me at gmail at deepalan@gmail.com. Thank you.